The Valor's Edge, is presented by Bone Spears and Starships. If you enjoy this story, like and subscribe. Introduction. The Valor's Edge drifted through the cold expanse of space, its hull scarred from countless skirmishes. The once proud battleship now bore the marks of a grueling conflict, its surface marred by debris and blast scars. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, punctuated only by the low hum of the ship's engines and the occasional clatter of equipment. Captain Liam Reeve stood by the viewport, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. He could see the remnants of the Coalition fleet scattered like broken toys across the void, a stark reminder of the losses they had endured. The Zorath had come in overwhelming waves, their sleek, formidable ships cutting through human defenses with ruthless efficiency. Every battle had been a desperate struggle, a fight to stave off extinction. The crew of the Valor's Edge were a weary but determined bunch, their faces etched with the fatigue of prolonged combat. They moved with a practiced urgency, their eyes reflecting the glow of the control panels. Each member of the crew knew the stakes. Humanity's survival hung by a thread, and they were the last bastion against the Zorath onslaught. The war with the Zorath had begun years ago, a conflict that started with a sudden, brutal invasion. The Zorath, a race of technologically advanced conquerors, had underestimated humanity's resolve. What they had not anticipated was the sheer willpower and ingenuity of the human spirit. The battles had been fierce and bloody, but each engagement revealed a resilience that kept the hope of survival alive. Reeve took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the starfield. The Valor's Edge was one of the last operational ships of the Coalition's once formidable fleet. Their numbers dwindled with each engagement, but the crew's spirit remained unbroken. The Zorath were relentless, but so were they. Inside the command center, the situation was equally grim. Tactical displays flickered with updates as Lieutenant Mara Klein, the ship's tactical officer, worked furiously to keep up with the evolving threat. The data streamed in, enemy ship positions, predicted trajectories, and damage reports. It painted a picture of a relentless enemy closing in on their final stronghold. Mara's face was a mask of concentration as she relayed updates to Reeve. "Captain, the Zorath fleet is regrouping. It looks like they're preparing for another major assault." Reeve nodded, his face stoic but his mind racing. "How much time do we have before they reach us?" "Approximately 30 minutes, Mara replied, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "We need to make every second count." As the crew busied themselves with preparations, Reeve's thoughts wandered to the early days of the conflict. He remembered the initial shock of the invasion, the disbelief that their advanced technology could be so easily overpowered. It had taken time for humanity to adapt and fight back, but adapt they did. Now, the Valor's Edge was humanity's last hope. The Zorath had underestimated them once, but they would not make that mistake again. With grim determination, Reeve prepared his crew for the upcoming battle. They had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to surrender now. The sound of klaxons filled the air as the ship's systems went into battle readiness. Reeve turned to his crew, his voice cutting through the din. "Prepare for combat. We're not done yet." Captain Liam Reeve stood alone in his quarters, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. He was a figure of stoic resolve, his broad shoulders squared and his expression unyielding. The weight of command had aged him, his once black hair now flecked with gray, his eyes hardened by countless battles. Reeve's mind was a steel trap, focused and unrelenting. He had seen the best and worst of humanity during this war. Each decision, each command, was etched into his memory, a record of the sacrifices made and the lives lost. He was a man who had embraced the burden of leadership with a quiet strength, and it was that very strength that had kept his crew together through the darkest hours. As he gazed out of the small viewport in his quarters, his thoughts drifted to the early days of the conflict. He remembered the shock and disbelief that had gripped the Coalition as the Zorath descended upon them. The initial battles had been chaotic, the Coalition forces caught off guard by the Zorath's superior technology and strategy. Reeve had been a rising star in the Coalition Navy then, a promising officer with a reputation for tactical brilliance. But it was not just his skill that had earned him his rank, it was his unshakable composure under fire. He had seen too many of his comrades fall, their dreams extinguished in the blink of an eye. It was these experiences that had hardened him, shaping him into the leader he was now. A flashback flickered in Reeve's mind, a vivid memory of a battle that had changed him forever. The scene was from an earlier engagement, a brutal conflict that had raged for days. Reeve was young, his face less lined but his eyes already shadowed by the gravity of war. He had been in the thick of it, commanding a smaller vessel against an overwhelming Zorath force. In that battle, the coalition fleet had been surrounded, and the losses had been catastrophic. Reeve's ship had sustained heavy damage, and he had watched helplessly as his crewmen were torn apart by the enemy's relentless assault. The sight of their faces, filled with fear and resolve, had stayed with him. He had fought through the chaos, his orders precise and calculated, but the cost had been personal. The memory lingered, a constant reminder of the price of victory. Reeve knew that every decision he made was influenced by that moment, the moment when he had realized that leadership was not just about strategy but about the lives entrusted to him. Back in the present, Reeve closed his eyes and took a deep breath, pushing the memories to the back of his mind. His crew depended on him now, and he had to remain the unshakable anchor in their storm of despair. He was their last line of defense, and he would not falter. As he prepared to return to the command center, Reeve's thoughts were clear. The war was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. But he would face whatever came with the same stoic resolve that had seen him through so many trials before. Rising tension. The command center of the Valor's Edge was abuzz with activity. Crew members scurried about, their faces set with determined expressions as they executed their pre-battle tasks. The once gleaming floors were now scuffed and marked by the rigors of war, but the crew's spirit remained unblemished. Lieutenant Mara Klein moved with practiced efficiency, her sharp eyes scanning the tactical displays and her fingers flying over the controls. Despite the chaos, she maintained a calm demeanor, a trait that had earned her respect among the crew. Her relationship with Captain Reeve was one of mutual respect and unspoken understanding. They had fought side by side in many battles, their bond forged in the crucible of war. "Lieutenant Klein," Reeve's voice came over the intercom, steady and commanding. "Status update." Mara's eyes flickered to the viewport where the Zorath fleet's approach was displayed. "Captain, we've completed our preparations. All systems are operational, and the crew is ready for the engagement. We've reinforced the hull and weapons systems as much as possible." Reeve's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Good. Make sure everyone knows their roles. This is going to be a tough fight." Mara nodded. "Understood, Captain." As Mara relayed the orders, she couldn't help but think about the personal stakes for each member of the crew. They were not just soldiers. They were individuals with families, dreams, and fears. Mara herself had a younger brother back on Earth, and every time she faced a battle, she thought of him, wondering if she would ever see him again. Her relationship with Reeve was professional, but deeply rooted in shared experiences. He had been a mentor to her, guiding her through the complexities of warfare and leadership. Their bond was built on mutual trust and respect, and though they rarely spoke of their personal lives, Mara knew that Reeve carried the weight of command with a heavy heart. He understood the sacrifices made by his crew, and it was that empathy that made him an effective leader. Mara's thoughts were interrupted by the clamor of a nearby console. She turned to see Corporal Jason Leary, a young and enthusiastic member of the crew, struggling with a malfunctioning system. His face was flushed with stress, and Mara approached him. "Corporal Leary, what's the problem?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. Leary looked up, frustration evident in his eyes. "The targeting systems are offline. I'm trying to recalibrate them, but it's not responding." Mara examined the console, her expertise quickly assessing the issue. "I'll handle it. You focus on the secondary systems." As Mara worked on the malfunctioning console, she thought about the personal sacrifices that each crew member had made. Many had lost loved ones in the conflict, and some had left behind families in search of a greater cause. The crew of the Valor's Edge was a microcosm of humanity's fight for survival, each person contributing their skills and courage to the battle. In the mess hall, the crew gathered for a brief respite before the battle. Conversations were hushed, the gravity of the upcoming engagement evident in their subdued tones. Lieutenant Grant, Reeve's second-in-command, stood at the front, trying to rally the crew with words of encouragement. "Listen up, everyone," Grant said, his voice resonating with determination. "We're about to face one of the toughest battles we've ever encountered. But remember why we fight. We fight for our homes, our families, and each other. We've been through hell and back, and we're still standing. Let's show the Zorath what humanity is made of." The crew nodded, a collective resolve forming among them. Their faces were set with determination, each one mentally preparing for the battle ahead. The camaraderie and shared purpose were palpable, a testament to their strength and resilience. In the quiet moments before the battle, Reeve took a final look at his crew, each member focused and ready. He walked among them, offering a nod or a brief word of encouragement. His presence was a steadying force, a symbol of unwavering leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. Reeve paused by Mara, who was still working at the console. "How's everything looking?" Mara looked up, her eyes meeting his. "We're ready, Captain. The crew is prepared, and the systems are coming back online. We're as ready as we can be." Reeve nodded. "Good. Let's give them everything we've got." As the klaxons blared, signaling the start of the battle, Reeve and Mara exchanged a final, understanding glance. They both knew that this fight would be unlike any other, but they also knew that they would face it together, with courage, determination, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. The crew took their positions, their focus sharp and their hearts steeled for the combat ahead. The Valor's Edge was ready for the battle that would determine the fate of humanity, and they were prepared to face it with everything they had. The command center of the Valor's Edge was abuzz with the final preparations as the crew assembled for the crucial briefing. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the flickering light of tactical displays and the soft hum of the ship systems. Captain Liam Reeve stood at the head of the room, a commanding presence as he addressed his officers. "All right, listen up," Reeve's voice cut through the murmur, steady and authoritative. "We're facing a significant threat from the Zorath fleet. Our objective is to hold them off long enough to buy time for the evacuation of our remaining forces. This is not just another battle. It's our last stand." Lieutenant Mara Klein, standing at the tactical console, projected a holographic map of the battlefield onto the central screen. The Zorath fleet was displayed in red, encroaching upon their position with menacing precision. "Our intelligence indicates that the Zorath are preparing a coordinated assault," Mara explained, her fingers tracing the enemy formations on the map. "Their command vessel will be leading the charge, and we can expect heavy fire on our outer defenses." Reeve nodded, his gaze fixed on the map. "We need to disrupt their formation and create confusion. Our strategy is to execute a double envelopment maneuver. Lieutenant Grant, you'll be in charge of the flanking forces. We'll need to hit their flanks hard to draw their attention away from our primary objective." Lieutenant Jason Grant, a tall man with a grizzled appearance, stepped forward. "Understood, Captain. What's our primary target?" "Our main goal is to neutralize their command vessel," Reeve replied. "If we can take out their central coordination, it'll create chaos within their ranks. Mara, you'll coordinate the attack from the tactical console. Make sure we have real-time updates on enemy movements." Grant nodded, his face set with determination. "I'll ensure that we're ready to strike when the time comes." Reeve then turned to the crew, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This is going to be one of the toughest fights we've ever faced. The odds are against us, but we've fought through worse. I know many of you have personal stakes in this battle, families, friends, futures. We fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone we've left behind." His words resonated with the crew, a shared sense of purpose filling the room. Reeve's leadership was not just about strategy. It was about rallying his people with a vision of hope and determination. As the briefing continued, Reeve engaged in a brief, personal conversation with Lieutenant Mara Klein. "Mara, I know this is a lot to handle. You've been doing an incredible job keeping everything together." Mara looked up from the console, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you, Captain. It means a lot, especially with everything we're up against." "I'm just doing my part." Reeve nodded, his expression softening for a moment. "We all are. That's what makes us strong." Across the room, Corporal Leary approached Lieutenant Grant. "Sir, we've finished calibrating the targeting systems. Everything is ready on our end. Grant gave him a reassuring smile. Good work, Corporal. You've done your part. Now let's make sure we give it our all. The room buzzed with final preparations as the officers and crew took their positions. Reeve continued to offer words of encouragement, moving among his people and bolstering their spirits. His presence was a constant reminder of the strength and unity required to face the upcoming battle. With the briefing concluded, Reeve gathered his officers for a final word. Remember, this is not just about tactics. It's about fighting for everything we hold dear. We may be the last line of defense, but we are also the embodiment of humanity's spirit. We fight with everything we have, for ourselves and for those who couldn't be here. The officers nodded, their faces set with determination. As they moved to their stations, the crew of the Valor's Edge prepared for the imminent engagement. The final moments before the battle were filled with a solemn sense of duty and resolve. Reeve stood by the viewport once more, watching as the Zorath fleet approached. His mind was clear, his purpose unwavering. He knew that whatever the outcome, he and his crew would face it with the courage and determination that had defined their fight from the beginning. As the klaxons sounded the start of the battle, Reeve took one last look at his crew, a silent promise of his unwavering resolve. The fight for humanity's survival was about to begin, and they would face it together. The battle begins. The first wave of the Zorath attack descended upon the Valor's Edge with a brutal intensity. The vast expanse of space was suddenly filled with the blinding light of laser fire and the deafening roar of plasma cannons. The Zorath fleet, with its sleek, menacing ships, moved in a coordinated assault, their advanced technology outmatching the Coalition's defenses. Captain Liam Reeve was at the helm, his eyes darting across the tactical displays. The Zorath ships swarmed around them, their agile maneuvers making it difficult for the Valor's Edge to get a clear shot. The ship rocked violently as enemy fire pounded against its hull. Reeve's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. "Lieutenant Klein, give me a status report." Reeve barked over the din. Mara Klein's fingers flew over the controls, her face illuminated by the flickering screens. "Captain, the Zorath are launching a full-scale assault. Their main force is targeting our port side. We've lost shields in Sector 3. They're moving to breach our defenses." Reeve's mind raced as he processed the information. "Prepare to engage their flanking forces. We need to split their attention. Lieutenant Grant, deploy our fighter squads to intercept their support vessels. We can't let them reinforce their main attack." Lieutenant Grant's voice crackled over the comms. "Fighter squads are away, Captain. They're engaging the Zoratha's smaller ships. We're holding them off, but their numbers are overwhelming." The Valor's Edge shuddered as another barrage of Zorath fire struck the hull. Sparks flew from the damaged panels, and the lights flickered in the command center. The crew worked furiously, their movements a blur of urgency and focus. "Damage report," Reeve demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ensign Davis, the ship's damage control officer, glanced up from his console, his face pale but determined. "Captain, we've sustained significant hull breaches in multiple sectors. Engineering is working to reroute power and seal the breaches, but we're losing atmosphere in Deck 12. Reeve's jaw tightened. "Reinforce the affected sectors. We need to maintain pressure on the Zorath while we stabilize the ship." The command center was filled with the sounds of klaxons and the harsh glow of warning lights. Crew members shouted orders, their faces etched with concentration. The battle was a chaotic ballet of fire and maneuvering, each moment a desperate struggle for survival. As the battle raged on, Reeve's tactical decisions were crucial in keeping the Valor's Edge in the fight. He directed the ship's firepower with precision, targeting the enemy's command vessels to disrupt their coordination. The Zorath ships were heavily armored, but Reeve's experience allowed him to exploit their weaknesses. The tactical displays showed a fleeting opportunity as a gap formed in the Zorath's formation. "Now's our chance," Reeve said, his voice firm. "Concentrate fire on their command vessel. Mara, give me a firing solution." Mara's fingers danced across the console as she calculated the optimal trajectory for the ship's weapons. "Target locked, Captain. Firing in 3, 2, 1 now." The Valor's Edge unleashed a volley of energy blasts, striking the Zorath command vessel with pinpoint accuracy. The enemy ship shuddered under the assault, its shields flickering before collapsing entirely. The Zorath fleet responded with renewed fury, their coordinated attack intensifying. Reeve's eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, his mind calculating their next move. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to avoid their concentrated fire while we regroup. In the midst of the chaos, Lieutenant Grant was coordinating the fighter squads with determined efficiency. All fighter squads, hold your positions and cover the Valor's Edge. We need to push back the Zorath's flanking forces. Don't let them through. The fighter pilots maneuvered through the maelstrom of enemy fire, their small, agile ships darting between the larger Zorath vessels. Explosions lit up the void as the fighters engaged the Zorath's support ships, buying precious time for the Valor's Edge. Back in the command center, Mara's eyes were fixed on the readouts. Captain, the enemy is shifting their focus to our starboard side. We're taking heavy fire, and our hull integrity is degrading. Reeve's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Deploy additional energy shields and reroute power to the damaged sections. We need to hold out until we can turn the tide. The crew moved with a sense of urgency, their actions a testament to their training and resolve. Reeve's leadership was evident in the way the crew responded to the pressure, their determination unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. The battle continued to escalate, the Valor's Edge caught in a relentless storm of Zorath fire. The ship's systems were pushed to their limits, and the crew fought to keep the vessel operational amidst the barrage. Reeve's tactical acumen was crucial in guiding them through the chaos. Captain, we've got a new problem, Mara reported urgently. The Zorath are deploying boarding pods. They're trying to breach our hull. Reeve's face hardened with resolve. Deploy internal defenses and prepare boarding teams. We can't let them get inside. The crew sprang into action, moving to intercept the incoming Zorath boarding pods. The corridors of the Valor's Edge were filled with the sound of gunfire and the clash of metal as the Zorath attempted to breach the ship's interior. Reeve remained at the helm, his focus unyielding. The battle was a brutal test of endurance, but he knew that their survival depended on their ability to adapt and respond to the ever-changing threat. As the battle raged on, the Valor's Edge was forced into a desperate defensive position. The Zorath fleet had managed to penetrate their outer defenses, and now the ship was enduring a relentless onslaught. Captain Liam Reeve stood at the command console, his face illuminated by the harsh light of the tactical displays. Captain, we've got multiple hull breaches in Deck 7, Mara Klein reported, her voice tight with concern. Engineering is overwhelmed. We're losing critical systems. Reeve's eyes narrowed as he scanned the tactical map. The situation was dire. Zorath boarding pods had breached several sections of the ship, and the crew was engaged in fierce combat to repel them. To make matters worse, the enemy's command vessel had regrouped and was preparing a second wave of attacks. Just then, the ship shook violently as another Zorath assault hit the hull. The ship's warning alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Reeve's face went pale as he received an urgent transmission from Lieutenant Grant. Captain, we're being flanked on our starboard side. We've lost several fighter squads, and their reinforcements are closing in. We need to make a decision. Either reinforce our defenses or launch a counteroffensive against the Zorath command vessel. Reeve's mind raced. Reinforcing their defenses might buy them time, but it could also leave the command vessel free to continue its assault. On the other hand, an aggressive counteroffensive could potentially turn the tide, but it carried the risk of further compromising their already vulnerable position. Reeve's thoughts turned to his crew, their faces etched with determination and fatigue. Each decision he made now could mean life or death for those he had sworn to protect. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, and he knew that the wrong choice could have catastrophic consequences. He glanced at Mara, who was working furiously to stabilize the ship's systems. Mara, how much time do we have before we lose control of Deck 7? Mara looked up, her expression grim. We're minutes away from critical failure. If we don't act soon, we'll lose power to our main systems, and the ship could become unmanageable. Reeve's jaw tightened. The choice was clear. He needed to make a decision that balanced immediate survival with long-term strategy. His mind flashed back to the earlier days of the war, when he had faced similar dilemmas and made decisions that shaped the course of the conflict. Taking a deep breath, Reeve made his decision. Lieutenant Grant, launch the counteroffensive. Focus all available firepower on the Zorath command vessel. We'll reinforce our defenses as best as we can, but we need to disrupt their command structure if we're going to have any chance of turning this battle around. Grant's voice crackled over the comms. Understood, Captain. Engaging the command vessel now. Reeve turned to Mara. Reroute power to the ship's core and reinforce internal defenses. We'll hold them off for as long as we can. As the Valor's Edge swung into action, the crew worked tirelessly to execute Reeve's orders. The ship's guns blazed as they targeted the Zorath command vessel, their concentrated fire striking the enemy ship with relentless fury. The Zorath fleet's formation began to falter as their command structure was thrown into disarray. Reeve watched the battle unfold, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and anxiety. The immediate threat of the command vessel was being neutralized, but the cost was becoming apparent. The ship's hull continued to take damage, and the crew's fatigue was visible in their strained expressions. A sudden explosion rocked the command center, and Reeve staggered, catching himself on the console. His eyes met Mara's, and he could see the same determination and fear mirrored in her gaze. The battle was far from over, and every decision made now would impact their chances of survival. In the midst of the chaos, Reeve's personal conflict was palpable. The weight of leadership and the responsibility for his crew's lives were an unrelenting burden. He knew that every decision was a gamble, and he could only hope that his choices would lead them to victory. As the Zorath command vessel finally began to falter, Reeve felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The immediate threat was being neutralized, but the battle was far from over. The crew of the Valor's Edge was still fighting, and their survival depended on their ability to endure the ongoing assault. Turning point. The situation on the Valor's Edge was rapidly deteriorating. With the Zorath fleet's overwhelming numbers and relentless assault, Captain Liam Reeve knew that conventional tactics would not be enough. He needed to think outside the box to turn the tide of the battle. Lieutenant Klein, Reeve called out, his voice resolute, we need to create a diversion. Something that will draw their attention away from our vulnerable sectors. Mara's eyes widened as she realized the potential implications of Reeve's request. Captain, you're suggesting a bait-and-switch maneuver? That's risky, but it might just work. Reeve nodded. Exactly. We'll use the damaged sections of the ship as bait. If we can draw their main force to those areas, we can hit their vulnerable flanks with everything we've got. Mara quickly began recalibrating the ship's systems to simulate critical failures in the targeted sectors. As she worked, Reeve issued orders to the rest of the crew. Grant, prepare a concentrated counterattack on the Zorath's flank. We're going to hit them hard when they take the bait. I need all available fighter squads to assist. Grant's voice was filled with determination. Aye, Captain. We'll be ready. As the Valor's Edge continued to endure heavy fire, Reeve prepared for the next phase of his plan. The ship's hull was battered, and the crew's exhaustion was palpable, but Reeve's focus was unwavering. The success of their gambit depended on precise execution and the courage of his crew. The critical moment arrived as the Zorath fleet responded to the simulated failures in the ship systems. Their ships began to converge on the damaged sectors, eager to exploit the apparent weakness. Reeve's gambit was working, at least, that was the hope. Captain, the Zorath are taking the bait, Mara reported, her voice tinged with anticipation. They're concentrating their fire on the simulated breaches. We're seeing a significant shift in their formation. Reeve's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Now's our chance. Engage the flanking forces with everything we've got. All hands, prepare for full offensive. The Valor's Edge unleashed a barrage of firepower at the Zorath fleet's exposed flank. The enemy ships were caught off guard, their defensive formations in disarray as they tried to regroup. The fighter squads, following Reeve's orders, moved in to further disrupt the Zorath's coordination. Amidst the chaos, Reeve noticed an enemy cruiser making a beeline for the Valor's Edge's exposed command center. The ship was moving quickly, intent on delivering a decisive blow to the heart of their operations. Reeve, we have an enemy cruiser on a direct course for the command center. Mara shouted. We need to take it out before it reaches us. Reeve's jaw tightened. Deploy interceptors and concentrate fire on that cruiser. We can't let it breach our command center. The battle was now a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The Valor's Edge was maneuvering with precision, its weapons firing in quick succession to intercept the enemy cruiser. The ship's thrusters roared as it executed sharp turns, evading incoming fire while maintaining its assault on the Zorath flank. Reeve watched with a mixture of tension and determination as the interceptors engaged the enemy cruiser. The ship's screens were filled with the flashing lights of explosions and the frantic movements of the fighter squads. Every decision Reeve made was critical, and he knew that a single misstep could lead to disaster. The cruiser's shields began to fail under the concentrated fire of the interceptors. "Push forward," Reeve ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to ensure that this cruiser is neutralized before it can inflict further damage." As the Valor's Edge moved to flank the cruiser, the enemy ship began to break apart under the relentless assault. The cruiser's engines exploded in a burst of flames, and the threat to the command center was finally eliminated. Reeve took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the command center. The crew was battered but resolute, their efforts paying off as the Zorath fleet began to falter. With the destruction of the enemy cruiser and the success of their counteroffensive, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Zorath fleet, now reeling from the unexpected assault, struggled to regain its composure. Reeve's tactical brilliance had given the Valor's Edge a fighting chance. "Captain, the Zorath are retreating," Mara announced, a note of relief in her voice. "Our offensive has forced them to withdraw." Reeve allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before refocusing on the task at hand. "Maintain defensive readiness. We don't know if this is a feigned retreat or a real one." As the Valor's Edge continued to assess the battlefield, Reeve's thoughts were with his crew. The battle had been won, but the cost had been high. The ship was heavily damaged, and many of the crew were injured or exhausted. Reeve walked among his crew, offering words of encouragement and gratitude. His leadership had guided them through one of the most harrowing battles of their campaign, and their resilience had turned the tide. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, Reeve stood at the viewport, staring out into the void of space. The Valor's Edge had survived, but the fight was far from over. With renewed resolve, Reeve prepared for the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that their struggle for survival was far from over. The destruction of the Zorath command vessel marked a turning point in the battle. As the massive enemy ship erupted into a fiery explosion, its remains scattered across the void. The Zorath fleet, now without their central coordination, began to crumble under the relentless assault from the Valor's Edge and its allies. Captain Liam Reeve watched from the command center, his face illuminated by the harsh light of the tactical displays. The sight of the Zorath command vessel breaking apart was a bittersweet victory. The ship's destruction had been a crucial blow to the enemy, but it had come at a tremendous cost. "Captain, the enemy fleet is in full retreat," Mara Klein reported, her voice tinged with exhaustion and relief. "We've secured the area, but our own damage is extensive." Reeve nodded, his eyes scanning the damage reports. "How bad is it?" Mara's fingers danced over the console as she reviewed the information. "We've sustained critical damage to our propulsion and energy systems. Hull breaches in multiple sectors. Engineering is working on repairs, but it will take time." Reeve's heart sank as he took in the grim reality. The battle had been won, but the toll on his ship and crew was substantial. He could see the fatigue etched into the faces of his officers and crew, their bodies slumped in exhaustion. In the aftermath of the battle, the command center was a scene of weary determination. The crew moved with a slow, deliberate pace, their actions driven by a sense of duty rather than energy. The ship's interior was filled with the sounds of alarms, the hum of damaged systems, and the occasional shout of a crew member working to stabilize the vessel. Reeve walked among his crew, offering words of encouragement and support. He stopped at Mara's station, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the sweat on her brow. "You did well, Mara. We wouldn't have made it without your efforts." Mara looked up, her expression a mix of gratitude and fatigue. "Thank you, Captain. We all did our part." Reeve's gaze shifted to Lieutenant Grant, who was overseeing the repair teams. Grant's face was smeared with grime, his uniform disheveled. "Lieutenant, how are we holding up?" Grant's voice was hoarse but determined. "We're getting the critical systems back online. It's slow going, but we're making progress. The crew is pushing through, despite the damage." Reeve nodded, A sense of pride mingled with the weight of responsibility. The battle had been a test of their resolve, and they had emerged victorious, though battered and bruised. The emotional toll of the battle was evident in the quiet moments that followed. The crew gathered in the mess hall, sharing a rare moment of respite. The normally bustling area was subdued, the hum of conversation replaced by tired murmurs and the clinking of utensils against trays. Reeve joined his crew, taking a seat at a table where several of his officers were gathered. The atmosphere was heavy with a mix of relief and sorrow. The victory had come at a steep price, and the crew's exhaustion was palpable. Lieutenant Mara Klein looked up from her meal, her eyes meeting Reeve's with a hint of melancholy. "Captain, what now? What do we do after all this?" Reeve took a deep breath, his mind wrestling with the weight of the question. "We keep moving forward. We've survived this battle, but the war isn't over. We need to regroup, repair, and prepare for whatever comes next." As Reeve spoke, he could see the resolve in his crew's eyes. Despite their fatigue and the toll of the battle, their determination remained unshaken. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, a testament to their strength and resilience. As the Valor's Edge continued to drift through the aftermath of the battle, Reeve found himself alone in his quarters, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous hours. He stared out of the viewport, the stars shining in the vast emptiness of space. The destruction of the Zorath command vessel had been a hard-won victory, but the cost was heavy. Reeve's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the events of the day. The emotional and physical toll of the battle weighed heavily on him. He had seen the strain in his crew's eyes, the exhaustion etched into their faces. Each decision he had made, each order he had given, had been a gamble with their lives. The victory had come with a heavy price. The damage to the ship was extensive, and many of his crew members were injured or weary. Reeve knew that their fight was far from over, and the challenges ahead would test their strength and resolve. In the quiet of his quarters, Reeve allowed himself a moment of introspection. The burden of leadership was a heavy one, but he was determined to see it through. The Valor's Edge had survived this battle, and as long as he drew breath, he would fight to ensure that they continued to persevere. Aftermath and reflection. The immediate aftermath of the battle left the Valor's Edge in a state of quiet, battered but triumphant. The once fierce cacophony of combat had given way to the subdued hum of damaged systems and the quiet conversations of a weary crew. The ship drifted through space, the remnants of the Zorath fleet scattered in the void. Captain Liam Reeve stood on the bridge, surveying the damage with a heavy heart. The once pristine command center was now a scene of destruction. Flickering lights, scorched consoles, and the smell of burnt electronics filled the air. Despite the victory, the toll on the ship and its crew was evident. Reeve turned to Lieutenant Mara Klein, who was working diligently to restore critical systems. Her face was pale, and dark circles under her eyes spoke of long hours and exhaustion. "Mara, what's our status?" Mara looked up from her console, her expression weary. "We're making progress on repairs, but it's slow. Hull breaches are being patched, and critical systems are coming back online. It's going to take time to get everything back to normal." Reeve nodded, acknowledging the enormity of the task ahead. The ship had sustained significant damage, and the crew's efforts to repair it were just beginning. The victory against the Zorath had come at a high cost, and the scars of the battle were all too apparent. In the mess hall, the crew gathered for a brief moment of respite. The usual banter and camaraderie were subdued, replaced by a somber mood as they reflected on the battle's outcome. The mess hall was filled with the sounds of quiet conversation and the clinking of trays, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous hours. Lieutenant Grant sat at a table, his face etched with exhaustion. He was surrounded by a few of his fellow officers, their expressions a mix of relief and sorrow. "We did what we had to do," Grant said, his voice carrying a note of grim determination. "But we've lost good people today. We can't forget that." Reeve joined the group, his presence a reminder of the leadership that had guided them through the battle. He could see the fatigue and emotion in their eyes, the weight of their losses evident in their demeanor. "We've lost a lot today," Reeve said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "But we also achieved something important. We need to honor those we've lost by continuing to fight and build a future for those who are still with us." The crew nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of sadness and resolve. The victory was bittersweet, a reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of their goals. In his quarters, Reeve sat at his desk, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily upon him. He reviewed the damage reports and casualty lists, each name a reminder of the cost of victory. The ship was battered, and the crew was exhausted, but they had survived and emerged victorious. Reeve's thoughts turned inward as he reflected on the role he had played in the battle. The decisions he had made, the risks he had taken, and the lives he had gambled with weighed heavily on his conscience. The victory had come at a steep price, and he was left to grapple with the implications of his choices. As he gazed out of the viewport, the stars shining brightly in the distance, Reeve felt a profound sense of melancholy. The battle had been a testament to the crew's bravery and resilience, but it had also highlighted the harsh realities of war. The cost of victory was a heavy burden, and Reeve was left to bear it. The silence of his quarters was a stark contrast to the chaos of the battle, and Reeve allowed himself a moment of introspection. The path ahead was uncertain, and the challenges they faced were far from over. But as long as he drew breath, he would continue to lead, to fight, and to strive for a future where the sacrifices of his crew would not be in vain. The following days were spent in a mix of repair and recovery. The Valor's Edge was a ship scarred by battle, but its crew remained resolute. The ship's corridors, once bustling with activity, were now filled with the sounds of repair teams and the occasional quiet conversation. Reeve walked through the ship, his gaze taking in the damage and the efforts of his crew. Despite their exhaustion, they worked tirelessly to restore the ship to its former glory. Each repair, each patch, was a testament to their determination and resilience. In a quiet corner of the ship, Reeve found himself alone with his thoughts. The battle had been a turning point, a moment of both triumph and loss. The cost had been high, and the emotional toll was palpable. Yet, amidst the sorrow and fatigue, there was a sense of purpose. Reeve knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he remained committed to his role. The crew of the Valor's Edge had proven their strength, and together they would face whatever came next. The victory, though costly, had reaffirmed their resolve to continue the fight and strive for a future beyond the darkness of war. As he looked out into the endless expanse of space, Reeve felt a renewed sense of determination. The battle was over, but the struggle continued. With his crew by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Valor's Edge floated in the silent expanse of space, its battered hull now quiet after the recent conflict. The crew, though weary and scarred, had begun to find a semblance of normalcy amidst the lingering damage. The ship's repair teams worked diligently, and the mood on board was a mix of solemn reflection and cautious optimism. Captain Liam Reeve stood at the viewport of his quarters, gazing out at the distant stars. The battle had been a turning point, a moment that had reshaped their journey and tested their resolve. The victory had come at a steep price, but it had also solidified the crew's determination to press on. Reeve's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of his comm system. "Captain, we've received a transmission from command." Mara Klein's voice came through, her tone carrying both relief and anticipation. "They're requesting a status update and further instructions." Reeve took a deep breath, his gaze still fixed on the stars. "Send them our current status and request a meeting with High Command. It's time we discuss the next steps for the Valor's Edge and our place in this ongoing conflict." As the transmission was sent, Reeve felt a sense of resolve. The battle had changed them all. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, but the fight for humanity's future was far from over. The Zorath were still a formidable threat, and the path ahead would require both strength and strategic foresight. In the days that followed, the Valor's Edge received orders to return to the core systems for a debriefing and strategic planning. The crew, though exhausted, approached the task with a renewed sense of purpose. The battle had forged a stronger bond among them, and their experiences had deepened their resolve to fight for humanity's survival. Reeve sat in the ship's conference room, surrounded by his officers. The atmosphere was one of focused anticipation as they prepared for their briefing with High Command. Each crew member carried the weight of their experiences, but their determination to see the mission through was palpable. "Captain Reeve," a voice crackled over the comm system. "We're ready for your report." Reeve nodded and began to speak, recounting the battle's details and the lessons learned. His tone was measured, but his words conveyed the gravity of their situation. The victory over the Zorath was significant, but it was clear that their struggle was far from over. As the briefing concluded, Reeve and his crew prepared for their next assignment. The future was uncertain, and the challenges ahead were daunting, but they were ready to face them together. The battle had tested their limits, but it had also shown them the strength and resilience that lay within. The Valor's Edge set its course for the core systems, the stars stretching out before them. Reeve's gaze remained steady as he looked toward the horizon, a sense of determination guiding him. The battle was a chapter in their ongoing story, and the next steps for humanity were just beginning to unfold. With his crew by his side, Reeve was ready to face whatever came next. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was confident that they would meet it with the same courage and resolve that had carried them through the darkest moments of their battle.